Welcome back, class. In this chapter, chapter 7, we will be discussing researching the speech-making process, and so how to gather materials to support our ideas and the various claims we make in our speeches. So why should we do research anyways? Research helps us create learning. So one way that we learn is by researching a topic, and it develops deeper knowledge about that topic, right? So, when I first took my public speaking class and my interpersonal communication class, I had no idea what communication studies was really about. And, years later, now I'm working towards the PhD in this topic, right? And the only way that I'm able to do that is because I spend a lot of time reading about communication and the topic as a whole. So with our speech topics, read a lot about your topic. Um, with, in addition to just learning, by doing our research, that establishes credibility as the speaker. So you become almost like an expert on your topic within your speech. And being able to cite sources and cite research regarding the topic you're speaking about provides you with credibility. It establishes your credibility. The audience can trust you with that information. And that's the second point. It develops trust with the audience. So when you've done your homework, when you're citing research and books and magazines and other articles, you're establishing trust because you're saying, look, just don't take my word for it. Here's the references that I learned this information from. So you potentially, as the audience, could go and fact check the information that I'm sharing in my presentation. It provides a level of sophistication to the topic. So by being able to communicate our topics in a dynamic way and add research, like integrating sources into our topic, it provides a level of professionalism and sophistication. It helps create that ethos, the credibility, and it makes you look really smart as a speaker. So what are some of the sources we're going to be using in our speeches? Well, you could use books. Books tend to provide a lot of information, a very complete overview of a particular topic. You look at the books behind me, right? And so you could pick out specific passages in a book, or you could summarize the whole thesis of a book. So how you integrate books into your speech will differ depending on the topic and the purpose of your speech. You could also use periodicals. These are like newspapers or magazines. It could be census data that is published through organizations. So you could use periodicals, newspapers, magazines. Be careful though, like if you're going to be using tabloids or maybe Wikipedia's sites, maybe not the best thing to do. In fact, using those sites or those resources might actually damage your credibility. You could also use scholarly journals. This is like the standard. So the more you advance in your higher education, the more you're going to rely on scholarly journals rather than just the information presented in the textbook. And so I remember transferring out of the community college system into the university system. And that's essentially where you're going to be accessing these scholarly journals to support your research papers, to support your presentations, and so forth. So I would be happy if you used primarily scholarly journals in your speeches. You could use websites. Again, you want to make sure those websites pertain to your topic. You don't want to use, just random personal blogs or sites developed by conspiracy theorists, unless again that's relevant to your topic. So use websites with caution. You want to make sure they're credible. You could use expert testimony, And you could also use audio and visual type resources as well, such as graphs, charts, those types of things. So how do we go about the research process? Well, there's really two ways you can approach research. There's the directed and specific approach. And this is where you have a specific topic in mind and you go right into that topic by accessing relevant information on that topic. So some of the benefits of this approach is you don't really waste time or you don't really procrastinate on a topic because you already know what you're looking for. Some of the drawbacks to this approach is that sometimes in our minds we have an idea of the topic and we tend to become rigid and we don't allow for flexibility. And so sometimes research takes us in different trends or different avenues of that topic. And so if we limit ourselves, sometimes we might miss the broader picture or, maybe a different trend in the research. The second option is flexible and organic. So this is where we typically have a vague idea what we want to talk about. So let's say if I'm interested in, technology and how it affects humans, like that's a huge, broad topic. So I might just start doing some casual reading on, technology and human behavior. So some of the benefits of this is we are open-minded to, the topic. We aren't dead set on, just one particular aspect, such as like, cell phones and, phubbing, which is like, cell phone addiction to the point that we neglect our personal relationships. Like that's a very narrow topic. But even in that realm, we could look at, okay, what type of relationship, parent to child relationship or, romantic relationships, time of day the cell phone is being used, or what applications are, being used on the cell phone. So there's a lot of different, narrow approaches to that broad topic. So some of the cons or the drawbacks of the flexible organic approach is that sometimes it gets overwhelming when we're exposed to just so much information. So before you begin, what you want to do is brainstorm a list of possible topics and ideas for your main points. Essentially word vomit. Just put your ideas on a piece of paper, maybe start creating searchable key terms. So narrow down those broad ideas into those key phrases, such as technology's influence on human behavior. And then you could look more specifically like social media and human behavior, or social media's impact in relational development, things like that. Brainstorm places to begin your research. So this might be looking at scholarly articles on the library site, or maybe looking at Google, or maybe of an expert person or a researcher on that topic. And then take notes along the way. So this might include creating a bibliography. And so all the sources that you read, just jot down a few notes, like what did you find? Was it helpful? What was the key points? Because you might end up using those. And if you don't, then you've already established kind of a list of things you've already gone through. So how do I know what is scholarly? So when we look at sources, how do we know that they're credible and appropriate for a scholarly type context? Well, there's 4 things that we look for, and this is credibility and authorship, accuracy of the content, recency of publication, and if there's any biases. So let's go ahead and look through each one. So credibility and authorship. We want to look at who are the authors of this source or this reference that I'm looking at. Are the names included on this piece of work? So do we know who the people are that wrote it? Are they actually experts in that field? So you want to look for authors' credentials. So do they have a PhD in something? Are they affiliated with a particular institute? Or, are they just this random person who decided to write a book about the topic and they don't really have the expertise to do so? That could lead to inaccurate information. Are the author's credentials relevant to the information provided? So these are some things when we look at in terms of credibility and the authorship. So accuracy of the content. What information is presented? Are sources cited? Do other sources provide similar information? So you want to make sure, like, if someone's writing a book and they aren't citing any information or sources, then that's like really just their own opinion. And so we can't necessarily trust that as accurate. I could have inaccurate opinions about anything. It doesn't make that information valid. So you want to look for, are they relying on other sources or previous arguments to establish, their reasoning and conclusions? Are there charts, graphs, tables, bibliographies included that really outline previous research or ideas that have been presented that follows that topic? And how long is the source? So do they have like only 3 sources, or do they have 100 sources backing up their claims? The R is for recency and currency. And so you want to look at the date of publication. So when was this reference or this source published? And the reason why we do this is because information becomes outdated. So, some experiments we conducted 20 years ago might not be valid today because humans are constantly changing. Behaviors change. And so sometimes the information that you're researching could be outdated and archaic. In fact, one of my former students gave a speech about Kellogg's, and you probably are familiar with Kellogg's Flakes, the cereal. Well, I guess the person, Kellogg, who developed those, had some really sadistic, radical ideas about just human biology. And so, the student cited some of Kellogg's original scientific research and experiments and really pointed out how outdated and just radical that thinking was. It was entertaining to listen to that speech, but Kellogg was a freaking nut job. So you might be interested in reading up on that yourself. So does the information provided need to be current, or is it a historical piece? So typically in research, in academic, social, scientific research, usually we only look 5 years in the past, and anything past that is considered historical. So we are on the cutting edge of research. So typically this is that rule of thumb. Is the information older than 5 years? If so, see if you can find something more recent. Okay, bias. Is the information presented in a biased point of view? So does it have some sort of political, ideological leaning to it? Or is it objective in their assessment? Now, obviously, we could have, in fact, one of the classes that I'm taking right now is philosophy and communication. And so there are religious communication scholars who present a religious worldview to scholarship. Now, how do they do that? They do it in a very balanced way by relying on both sides of the argument and really making these logical claims based on the evidence and sound reasoning. And so, even within the academy, we see that you can approach something from a particular worldview as long as you make a strong, compelling, non-biased argument for that. But we want to make sure that we're accessing, the those non-bias articles, those books and so forth, information. If so, be sure, so if you are accessing information that is has a biased lens, or it's viewing things from a particular philosophical or ideological framework, then you want to make sure that you're balancing your speech by giving both sides of the story. If we only rely on one particular type of research or literature to support our claims, then it's like people might view us and think like they're trying to be biased. So strive for neutrality in your presentations. If you're researching a controversial topic for maybe the persuasive speech, look at both sides of the argument and weigh the merits of their arguments. Okay, so we've talked about credibility, authorship, accuracy of the content, recency of publication, and biased. So some words of caution before you use the internet. You really want to make sure that, do you trust the website or not? So be cautious and ask yourself, what is the content of the website? Who is the creator and author of the website? When was it last updated? So these are some of the things that you would want to ask yourself before just finding information online, because there's a lot of information. And then lastly, ask yourself, why does this website exist? Is it the website, the homepage of a well-established, credible organization, or is it just someone in the basement putting random stuff out on the internet? So how to cite my sources in a speech. So some things that you don't want to cite in your speech are Wikipedia, about.com, ask.com, ehow.com. Like, while these are great to get a foundational knowledge of something, you want to extend beyond these and get richer sources of information. So when you're using the internet as a valuable tool to open a door to primary resources, so don't rely on Wikipedia as your primary source. Like, I go to Wikipedia for a brief overview of, let's say, a theory or concept, and then I go find it in the literature, the academic literature. So that way I'm going into that research process with some basic knowledge of something. And so yes, Wikipedia is great to do that, but it is subjected to error. Don't use them as primary sources in your speech. So how to cite sources in our outline and in our speech. So there are something called oral or verbal citations, and this is where we actually state the citation or the reference in our speeches. So it helps the audience distinguish between our own ideas and those inartistic proofs, those supporting documents or sources. So when you are verbally or orally citing a reference in your speech, you want to include relevant information, such as date of publication, the name, or the article name, or the book title, or the name of the magazine. You want to disclose where that information was published and who the author is. So, for example, according to Amy Cuddy, social scientific researcher at Harvard University, in 2014, published an article entitled blah, 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 states that, whatever you're talking about. So that's how you would do a verbal oral citation. Citing sources in outline speeches. So citation placement, you could do this before, middle, or after quotation or statistics. So you could say something like, power posing is a great way to build confidence, as discussed by Amy Cuddy in her 2014 research. So you could do before, middle, or after a quotation. primarily because if you're citing more than 4 or 5 sources and they all begin according to so-and-so, according to so-and-so, according to so-and-so, it gets redundant. So, see if you can spice things up a little bit. So to do that, you could use these signal terms, according to, as stated by, or Dr. X reports, or published in the Journal of Scientific, Medicine. Drinking water is good for you, right? It's like, no, duh. So you could use those signal terms to really signal when you're going to be dropping, a citation. So let's say, for example, you have a source, the latimes.com. So, this would be a wrong and a right way of doing an oral citation. So according to latimes.com, some random person wrote something. Great. You're contributing that information to the LA Times, but LA Times is just a platform, So on the right, we see the right way of doing things. So according to Andrew J. Campa, who wrote the article Research for Students in the LA Times in 2013 states, so in that example, you can recognize that we're providing enough information for the audience to get a better understanding of the type of source we're using. It adds credibility to that source. And again, it adds credibility to you as a speaker. So just remember, when you engage in the research process, research is not easy. It's time. It takes a lot of time. It can be difficult to read through a bunch of stuff. And you as the researcher has to be a critical thinker. But dig deep and think of research as treasure, and when you find that whatever source you're looking for, it's like finding treasure, and you're adding to your knowledge about a particular topic. So as we begin this researching process, keep those things in mind. You're looking for credibility, the authorship, accuracy, recency, and of course, is it biased or not? Thank you so much for joining in and listening to this presentation, and we'll see you next time.